The basic question to start is whether our perception is a veridical representation of the environment or not. At the first glance, we do not quite suspect that what we see may be, under certain environmental conditions, somewhat different than what it is. There are many questions that you may raise at this point. The first is that how do we know that an object has a single visual appearance that leads to a single percept in our consciousness? We know that the appearance of an object changes by light conditions. It may even be that we have a different visual perception of an object under different emotional states, moods. This immediately brings us to a set of interpretations and predictions about survival within the evolutionary context. We are sure that what we see is more or less what it is. Maybe we are able to see visible aspects of it. For instance, there is invisible light, called infrared light. We are not able to perceive infrared illumination that is indeed employed by eye trackers to illuminate participant faces for better video recordings of the eyes. You will learn them later on in these lectures. Here the point is that even if we are able to perceive the reflections of the visible light, they should have been enough for our survival as human species. That is of course applicable to other animal species as such. They have survived so far, and their visual system should have supported their survival. That is not a logical requirement, but it is very likely that it is an empirically correct claim. Okay, so from the perspective of evolution, our perception of the visual environment should be mostly veridical. I use the term intentionally. I use the term mostly intentionally because we know that there are cases in which our perception misleads us. These are visual illusions. Visual illusions are important not only because they exemplify borderline cases that show how our visual systems work, but also they are evidences for vision as construction. First, consider a few example visual illusions. This is called the Müller-Lyer illusion. The horizontal line in the bottom figure seems longer. However, they are of equal length. Here is another one. It is called the cafe wall illusion. In this figure, all the horizontal lines are parallel to each other. Another famous illusion is the Ebbinghaus illusion. In the Ebbinghaus figure, the size of the circles at the center are the same. The checker shadow illusion is an impressive one since the colors of the squares A and B are indeed the same, although they are perceived quite differently. Visual illusions may also lead to percepts that imitate motion. One example is called the grid illusion. There are different types of grid illusions, but this is one of them. In this illusion, you may be perceiving moving dots at the intersections of the white grid. Wikipedia gives a comprehensive list of visual illusions. For visual cognition research, the importance of visual illusions is that they show that visual perception is construction rather than being a veridical representation of the external world. Another supporting evidence that vision is construction comes from the existence of impossible figures as well as ambiguous figures. These are called the duck-rabbit figures, so you may perceive this figure either as a duck or as a rabbit. Similarly, you may perceive this as a squirrel or as a crocodile. The number of percepts that are generated from a single figure may be more than 2. For instance, in this figure, there are at least 3 percepts that arise from the given figure. These are called ambiguous figures. There are also so-called impossible figures, which support the idea that visual perception is construction. Here are some examples of them. Here the point is that it is not only that we perceive or we try to perceive these figures and say that they're impossible figures. The interesting thing is that when we try to establish a coherent interpretation of these figures insistently, so our eyes go back and forth on different regions in these figures. There is further and further evidence that visual perception is construction. One of them is called visual completion. Here are some figures that demonstrate the phenomenon of visual completion. I hope you are now convinced that visual perception is construction rather than being a veridical representation of the visual environment. In the next lecture, I will talk about visual perception in its relation to other communication modalities like language, as well as its relation to concepts and categories.